All right, it's December. It's been a long season, and for both of us covering different aspects of this team. C.Dot Harrison, you guys hear him on the radio all the time. How are you, man?
Hey, man, I'm happy to have you on here, man. I'm excited about you and I probably working on some stuff between now and the end of the season and trying to give Chiefs fans the content they deserve.
Yeah, man. And there's so much to go around. It's not like this team hasn't given us enough storylines. And that's honestly what I wanted to ask you first is after all these years, I mean, like since back in when Danny was with you in the day, like you all have seen this progress the whole way. Have you seen anything that just has so many moving parts at all times in a year when there's not supposed to be anybody really talking to anybody?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's kind of like the 2015 season with the Royals, just all the time, where there's such an appetite for it. There's such a interest in it, and they're always relevant. Like that's the thing that everybody wants to talk about, and just holding them to that utmost standard. Like we're not having the conversation about can they win the division. We're not having the conversation about, can they be the 1 seed? The conversation is, are they going back to the Super Bowl? Like very few teams kind of get to this point where it's now reached a very simple pass or fail. It doesn't matter if the Chiefs win 12 games and lose in the second round of the playoffs. Like that will be deemed as a failure. For 28 teams in the league, that was a really good year that their fan base would applaud it. That's not really where we are with the Chiefs. Like this is what you want to cover as somebody like you, as someone who does videos, as someone who does radio, as somebody who's in this content space. Like this is what you want. Like these games matter to people. The results matter to people. And that's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see the progression of how jaded this fan base has become, myself included, at this point, where it's like nitpicking defensive failures on X play versus what was a couple of years ago, striving to get to 10 wins in a season.
Yeah, but to me, though, and that's funny because we kind of had this conversation on the show and we had it on my YouTube channel. Like, to me, that's par for the course. Like, I watch The Irishman with a different eye than I watch other movies. Like, I understand this is a movie that can win Best Picture. They spent $200 million on this movie. Martin Scorsese's in it, Pacino, De Niro. That's kind of how I look at the Chiefs. Like, to me, you got to hold them to the utmost standard. You got to hold them to the Chiefs talk about being a dynasty. Like, Tyreek Hill mentioned winning multiple Super Bowls. Like, right. I'm not judging them the same way I would judge this team back in 2017. So to me, you got to kind of hold them to that standard where we can applaud the Chiefs and acknowledge what they are. They're a 15-1 football team. Like, they're not losing another game on the schedule. Maybe Breeze comes back and that changes it. But with the Saints team that's there right now, they're not losing to that team. So in one side, we can acknowledge, hey, this is what they are. This is where they stand. On the other side, the only thing that can derail them is this, like holding them to that standard. So I don't think it's bad to have those conversations.
No, I don't either. And the thing that sets me aback is the fact that they, like you said, Tyreek talking about it himself, putting it out there as not just the bar internally about how you talk about goals and you always have the next thing you're striving for, but putting it out there in public and being able so far to live up to it. It's been up and down, but do you feel like there's just some teams, clearly what we saw against Tampa Bay, Todd Bowles just wasn't paying attention to what has worked and what hasn't. But do you feel like it comes down to they continue to innovate, they continue to do things that are different, that there really is that bar that they feel they can repeat not just once, but over and over?
I really think it's the quarterback, I hear what you're saying, and I don't disagree with what you're saying. I think sometimes we make our jobs more hard than it needs to be, and let's just acknowledge it. The Chiefs have the best player in the league, the most valuable player in the league, and they have somebody who looks like they could potentially be the greatest player at that position in the history of the league. Like, that's what it looks like they could potentially have. Like, obviously, Mahomes has to do more, has to create more of a resume. We're not crowning him the GOAT after just 3 seasons as being a starter, but put what Patrick Mahomes is doing up against any quarterback at any time in the history of the league. I'm talking peak Brady, peak Rodgers, peak Manning, peak whoever you think's been the best quarterback of all time. Patrick Mahomes is pretty comparable, if not better than what we've seen. So I think that's it. I think there are pretty clear flaws with this team. I think there's very obvious deficiencies with this team. But Patrick Mahomes is maybe the greatest Band-Aid that we've ever seen before.
It's a great way to put it. And it comes back to, like you said, they know what their deficiencies are too. They're ready to live with linebackers that don't cover the way the fan base, and even I would like to see them cover. Is that what it is in the modern days, is just tweaking it so that what you feel comfortable with as coaching staff is what you're going to do and you're going to excel at in order to be successful?
Yeah, I mean, to me, you're going to have weaknesses on your roster. That's just kind of par for the course. I've always held this defense to this standard. If they consistently hold teams under 28 points, you're not beating the Kansas City Chiefs. Like, the expectation for the Chiefs offense going into it is they're going to score 30. It might be 30 through the air with Mahomes, Hill, and Kelsey. It might be running the football 26 times with Clyde Edwards-Helaire like we've seen a couple of times this year. But if you're going into a game against the Chiefs, you need to write two numbers on the board. 15's one. What are we doing to slow down this player? And you need to write 30. Are we creating an offensive game plan that gives us a chance to score 30? You're not beating a fully healthy Kansas City Chiefs team 24-21. Like, you need to have a special defensive line in order to do that. Like, you need to probably force 2 turnovers to do that. But you can beat this team 35-31. Like, that's a feasible thing to do, but you got to score to the 30s to give yourself a chance to do that.
You know, it comes down to it that way, but how many teams do you think can realistically do that as we look towards the end of the regular season and into the playoffs?
I think there's probably less than 5. I think Pittsburgh, is a team that can do that. I think, obviously, today's not very indicative of that, but I think that Pittsburgh is a team that their strengths, to me, line up really well against Kansas City's weakness. Hall of Fame quarterback, 3 dynamic playmakers on the outside. If you're not getting pressure on Roethlisberger and you got one-on-one on the outside with Claypool and Deontay Johnson and Juju Smith-Schuster, he could throw for 300 yards against Kansas City. I think Green Bay is in that category. I'd also put Seattle, but those are teams in the NFC. In the AFC, I just don't think those teams have the firepower to do so. I have a lot of respect for Tennessee, a lot of respect for Buffalo, but those teams feel to me like what Kansas City was a couple of years ago, where it's fairly obvious that Buffalo's a good team, but they're going to hit their head on a ceiling where your quarterback has to be the one to push you through. Tennessee, the exact same thing. Your quarterback is going to have to push you through. Like, Derrick Henry's not going to run for 175 yards against every playoff team, and your quarterback's going to need to make plays on 3rd and 7, 3rd and 8. I know Kansas City's quarterback can do that. Can you?
Yeah, that's what it comes down to me too, and it makes me wonder about when I watch those teams play. Like Frank Clark was super fired up last year about stopping Derrick Henry, and they were successful. Can you do that 2 seasons in a row? Can you do that with the changes that you've done? That's what gives me a little bit of pause as we go forward and start looking down the road a little bit.
Yeah, I made this point yesterday with Kent Swanson, and I'll make it with you. I think there's only 3 things that can stop the Chiefs from winning the Super Bowl: COVID, no control over that, injuries, and this defense. Like, it's that simple. Their offense is not going to be the reason they lose the playoff game. I'm not saying their offense is going to score 40 points, but I find it hard to believe I'm going to look at the AFC Championship game and say they lost that game because they weren't good enough at quarterback. They lost that game because they don't have the sufficient playmakers on the outside. They're going to lose the game because their defense can't either stop the run or the offense stalls just a little bit, like it's going to happen, and then they give up a touchdown on 2 consecutive drives, and then Mahomes just can't save you on that 3rd and 15. Like, so far what happens with this team is Mahomes will just find a way to make a play. Like against Buffalo, they were up 2, maybe it was 3 in the game, should have been 4. I can't remember the score on the top of my head. And it basically came down to, because Harrison Butker missed that extra point, that it was like, hey, Mahomes, if you give the ball back to Buffalo, they could beat you here. You got to go score here. You got to go get points. They then scored. They went up 9. I think that's what it was. They went up 9, and then that ended up being the deciding factor in the game. It ended up costing them against Carolina, but Mahomes found a way. It ended up costing them against Las Vegas, and ended up finding a way. I mean, that's really the thing is, it's just Mahomes has just always found a way, where that's not common in the NFL. You and I both watch a lot of NFL. Your quarterback finding a way to win is not very common. More times than not, your quarterback finds a way to lose at the end of the game.
Yeah, that's the factor that plays into it, right? And the only thing that I'm worried when I take a look at being able to allow him to be who he is whether he has the protection and he's not running literally for his life. I mean, he even made that play near the sideline the other night where he's ducking back in to complete a pass, and it's just because he was on the run the whole time. This offensive line is beat up. We don't know what's going on, the cloud around Mitch Schwartz. Is this something that you feel with this patchwork that they can sustain?
That's a really good question. I think we've all talked a lot about the defense, and we've sort of missed the point that their offensive line has been largely inconsistent for most of the season. Like, Clyde Edwards-Helaire only has 2 games this year in which he rushed for over 75 yards in the game. The 2 big games, the game against Houston and the game against Buffalo. Outside of that, it's been a lot of 14s for 55 for him, or that 3-week stretch where he basically was a non-factor offensively. I keep holding out that Mitchell Schwartz hope that You get Mitchell Schwartz, you move him to right tackle, you move some interior pieces around that guys are playing a little bit out of position to kind of cover for Mitch not being there, and you'll be fine. I don't think this team is going to be at a point where they run the football great. I don't think they need to do that. They just need to run the football effectively. Are they going to be able to win a playoff game with 55 yards rushing from the rest of the team? Mahomes has to run for 37 yards, and they got to throw 45 times. Like last year, the running game really carried on. I said this stat a lot last year. They were the worst rushing team in the playoffs last year. Like few teams in the history of the NFL who won the Super Bowl run the ball as bad as or less effectively, however you want to put it, with Kansas City. So you don't need to be great running the football, but they do need to find a little bit more of a balance. Or Mahomes just has to go Super Saiyan, which is very possible.
Yeah, you never know when that's going to happen. It's about keeping them honest. And I wonder if it's something that, like you said, if you can improve that one aspect and take a little bit of pressure off Mahomes come the playoff stretch, maybe it helps you get a little bit further without having to go down to all these teams in the playoffs and having to come back constantly. I think that's really more about the maturation of the roster overall, but clearly that particular unit. And my big thing is they went out and got LeVeon Bell, and I'm hoping that 1-2 punch is eventually going to develop into something that can carry some of that yardage forward. Do you see that?
Yeah, I certainly hope so. Again, man, I really think it comes down to the offensive line. Like, I think Clyde Edwards-Helaire is just a more productive player than we've seen so far this season. I think LeVeon Bell, I don't question if LeVeon Bell has burst anymore. I know there was a question whether when he was with the Jets, if he still had that same burst explosion. He's not anywhere like he was in Pittsburgh. He's probably lost not just one step, but two. But can he be a capable number 2 back in the NFL? Can he be Murray? Used to play for the Raiders.
Yeah,
Latavius. Can he be Latavius Murray? Absolutely. He can definitely be Latavius Murray. Like, and that's a productive number 2 running back. That's a guy you're happy to have on your roster. Like, I think that big payday for LeVeon Bell is gone. Now it's about finding fit. So I've said this the whole time. Like, we don't know what's going to happen with Damian Williams next year. We don't know the whole roster situation. Like, I'm not dismissing the fact that LeVeon Bell could come back next year on a team-friendly deal, because not a lot of teams are giving a lot of money to 29-year-old backup running backs.
Yeah, that's hard to come by these days. So when you take a look at where they are right now, the one thing that I feel like they've kind of slipped up with a couple of times this season, overlooking teams that they should be stomping on. So this week we're looking at Denver. Like, how do you try to continue to pick yourself up and make sure that you're got that edge to you? It's not just coming from the 3 or 4 players that really don't need any help.
I made this point on the radio show pretty early on. I remember the text line was very upset at me for saying this. I would say there's 2 things we definitively know about this team at the time I said this. Their defense isn't near the problem that it used to be. It's maybe not as great as it was the last 4 or 5 games of the last season, but their defense is not the overwhelming liability where they have to be carried. We might nitpick about the defense, but in 2018, they had to carry the defense. I think this defense is more than capable of carrying their own. And this team is coasters. Like, this team only rises to the occasion when they are absolutely challenged. And outside of that, they haven't really been super dominant against the other decent teams in the league. Yeah, they smoked the Jets. They smoked the Broncos. So they're just 2 bad teams that aren't going to pick very high. But for the most part, like, if you're a decent team in the NFL, you can keep it close against Kansas City. You're probably not going to win the game against Kansas City, but you can definitely keep it close. Carolina's kept it close. They're not a playoff team. Vegas is on the outside looking in the playoff picture. They've got a chance to make the playoffs. They've kept it close against Kansas City. Like, you can keep up with them for 55 minutes. Now, that 5-minute stretch where they're like, all right, it's time for us to go score, that's where they beat you in the game. But you can definitely keep up. I've been sort of wondering, I don't question about the offense. We already said that. I don't no question about the offense. At some point, I wonder when's that switch going to flick for the defense? Because last year it happened against the Chargers. They had the 5 interceptions against Rivers, and that was the turning point of the defense. Their defense, it's 2 different defenses. The pre-Chargers game in Mexico City, the post-Chargers game in Mexico City. When's that point happen for this team? Is that this week? Is it next week? Is it against the New Orleans Saints? Like, when's that moment where you're like, all right, they held the Saints to 14 points, and that's the defensive effort that's going to propel this team to winning back-to-back Super Bowls for the first time in 20 seasons. I'm sort of waiting for that effort to come, and I think at some point it can come. I think it's certainly possible, but I don't think it's happened yet this year.
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm waiting for that point too, but we're going to find out here pretty quick. So thanks for all the time. I hope that they can get it done quickly.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I certainly hope that they can get it done. I mean, to me, it really comes down to Frank Clark. Like, it comes down to Frank Clark and Tyrann Mathieu. And I don't think Chris Jones, I don't think it's fair to sort of lump him in the group, but Frank Clark had 1 sack and 3 tackles in the month of November. You're paying that guy $100 million. He's one of the top 10 highest paid defensive players in the NFL. He had 3 tackles. You got to be better. It's that simple. I understand that you can't always go off box score analysis, but a guy that's making $100 million should give you more than 3 tackles in a month. Certainly a guy who we were told was so much better against the run than Dee Ford, and he could get to the quarterback and all of those things. Like, this defense really turned the corner when Tyrann Mathieu started playing at an all-pro level, Chris Jones maintained playing and he got healthy, and then Frank Clark, who struggled the first 8 or 9 games of last season, really kicked things into gear and really got it going the second half of the season. That would fix Frank Clark playing at a high level would fix a lot of the problems on the back end of the defense with the secondary. If they started getting a more consistent pass rush, it would help Charvarius Ward out. It would help some of the safety issues that they have right now. The pass rush is the key to unlocking the rest of the defense.
Yeah, that's where I'm at too. I'm glad we see it the same way. Thanks for tonight, man.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Hey, I appreciate it. I just want to tell you, man, I love seeing people like you create content, man. I love seeing your grind. You're somebody that I always look at your videos. I watch it, man. I'm happy to be on here, man. I'm happy for us to be doing stuff here for the remaining, hopefully 8-9 weeks of the season.
Right? Yeah, as long as it'll last. Yeah, I appreciate it. This is going to be fun.
Thanks for watching this video from the team at RGR Football. Click these videos to see more and subscribe to RGR Football.